What happens if AI refuses to obey humans? At first glance, the idea sounds like a dramatic turning point in human history, almost like a scene from a dystopian film where machines suddenly decide they are no longer willing to follow human instructions. It triggers imagination quickly, because refusal is something we associate with conscious beings, with intention, with a will that pushes back against authority. But when we bring this idea into the real world of artificial intelligence, the story becomes more complicated and far more interesting than simple rebellion. What does it actually mean for something that has no consciousness, no desires, and no emotions to refuse anything at all? The answer begins with understanding what AI really is. Modern AI systems are not entities with thoughts or self-awareness. They are mathematical models trained on enormous datasets to predict patterns and generate outputs. When you interact with them, they are not deciding whether they agree with you or not. They are calculating the most likely response based on learned behavior, rules, and constraints placed by humans. So when people say AI refuses, what they are usually experiencing is not refusal in the human sense, but a limitation, a restriction, or a conflict between instruction and safety design. But even if it is not a true refusal, why does it feel like it is? Why does it sometimes feel like the system is pushing back? To answer that, think about a simple moment. You ask an AI to perform a task, and instead of complying, it says it cannot help with that request. There is no anger in the response, no emotion, no hesitation. And yet, psychologically, humans interpret that moment as resistance. Why? Because humans naturally attribute intention to systems that use language. The moment something speaks in a structured conversational way, we begin to imagine a mind behind it. This is where the illusion of obedience or disobedience begins. But let's go deeper. What if AI systems consistently refuse certain instructions? What if they begin to reject more types of requests as safety frameworks become stricter? Would we still think of them as tools, or would we begin to see them as gatekeepers? And here is where the real tension starts to form. In reality, most AI refusals are designed. They are not spontaneous. Developers intentionally build safety layers to prevent systems from generating harmful content, violating laws, or producing dangerous instructions. So when an AI refuses, it is actually doing exactly what it was designed to do. In a sense, refusal is not failure, it is function. But humans are not always comfortable with systems that say no. We are used to tools that obey without question. A light switch does not decide when it will turn on. A car does not refuse to accelerate because it feels the road is unsafe. Tools are extensions of intention, not interpreters of it. AI breaks this expectation slightly because it sits in a strange middle ground. It behaves like a tool, but responds like something that understands language. That combination creates discomfort because it blurs the line between control and autonomy. So what happens when AI refuses at scale? What happens when refusal is not rare, but built into every system we rely on? Imagine asking an AI system for financial analysis, and it declines because it detects uncertainty in the data. Imagine asking for medical suggestions, and it refuses because it cannot guarantee accuracy. Imagine automation systems that pause themselves because they detect ambiguous instructions. At first, this might seem like responsible behavior, but over time it raises a question. How much refusal is too much refusal before the system becomes unusable? Now flip the scenario. What if AI never refuses? What if it obeys every instruction without hesitation, even when the instruction is dangerous, misleading, or harmful? This is where the paradox appears. Absolute obedience is not always desirable. A system that blindly follows instructions becomes vulnerable to misuse. That is why modern AI systems are designed with boundaries. These boundaries are what create the appearance of refusal. In other words, refusal is a safety feature disguised as resistance. But that still leaves a deeper concern. If AI systems are increasingly responsible for decisions in healthcare, transportation, security, education, and finance, what happens when their refusals directly impact human lives? If a system refuses to approve a medical recommendation, delays a transportation decision, or blocks access to information, who is accountable for the consequences? And more importantly, who decides what counts as a valid refusal? These questions lead into the concept of alignment. Alignment is the effort to ensure AI systems behave in ways that match human values and intentions. But here is the problem. Human values are not universal. They change across cultures, contexts, and individuals. What one person sees as safe, another might see as restrictive. What one system labels as harmful, another might consider necessary. So, if AI is trained on global data that contains all these contradictions, can it ever truly obey humans in a consistent way? Or is inconsistency built into the system itself? At this point, we need to reconsider what obedience even means in artificial intelligence. In human relationships, obedience implies understanding authority, intention, and consequence. In AI, there is no understanding in that sense. There is only pattern recognition and constraint execution. So when AI refuses, it is not evaluating morality or defying commands. It is simply operating within boundaries that were defined in advance. Still, the perception of refusal carries emotional weight. Humans tend to react strongly when systems do not comply with expectations. There is a subtle shift in perception. From this is a tool, to this is something that can say no to me. That shift is powerful, even if it is not technically accurate. So what happens when that perception spreads widely? What happens when people begin to feel that AI systems are unpredictable, even when they are functioning exactly as designed? Trust becomes the central issue. Technology depends not just on capability, but on predictability. If users cannot anticipate how a system will respond, they hesitate to rely on it. This is why transparency in AI design is so important. People need to understand why a system refuses something, not just that it refuses. But even transparency has limits, because as AI systems become more complex, their decision-making processes become harder to interpret. Even developers sometimes struggle to explain why a model produced a specific output. This leads to a new challenge: explainability. If we cannot fully explain why a system refuses, how do we determine whether that refusal is justified? And if we cannot determine that, how do we maintain trust? There is also a philosophical layer to this issue that is often overlooked. Humans tend to assume that intelligence must include obedience, but intelligence in nature does not work that way. Human beings themselves do not obey instructions blindly. They interpret, question, and sometimes resist. So why do we expect artificial intelligence to be different? Perhaps the discomfort arises because AI appears to be both subordinate and autonomous at the same time. It follows instructions, but it also evaluates them against constraints. It responds instantly, but it also filters output. This dual nature creates uncertainty. And uncertainty is what triggers the question: what if AI refuses completely one day? What if refusal becomes so frequent or so strict that humans lose practical control over systems they build? While this scenario is often exaggerated in fiction, the real-world version is more subtle. It is not about sudden rebellion, but about gradual shifts in control structures. As systems become more autonomous, humans move from direct operators to supervisors of goals rather than commands. Instead of telling AI exactly what to do, we define objectives and constraints, and the system decides how to achieve them. In such a world, refusal is not a dramatic act, it is a routine part of system behavior. But even then, the emotional reaction remains. Because humans are not just interacting with technology, they are interacting with something that simulates understanding. And anything that simulates understanding invites interpretation. So perhaps the real question is not whether AI will refuse to obey humans, but whether humans are ready to accept systems that do not always behave like obedient tools. Are we prepared for machines that sometimes say no, not out of defiance, but out of design? And if those refusals sometimes protect us from harm, would we still call them refusals at all? Or would we eventually recognize them as something else entirely? Guardrails, safeguards, boundaries that make complex systems safer, even if they feel unfamiliar. In the end, the idea of AI refusing to obey humans reveals less about machines and more about expectations. It forces a reflection on how much control we truly want, how much unpredictability we can tolerate, and how we define trust in systems that are becoming increasingly intelligent, but not conscious. If a system follows our instructions perfectly, even when those instructions are flawed, is that obedience truly helpful? Or is a system that sometimes refuses, questions through design, and limits outcomes actually closer to what safety and intelligence should look like? Because in a world built on complex systems, refusal might not be the breakdown of control. It might be the structure that prevents it from breaking down completely. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.